Impact Teams Radio. Welcome to Impact Teams Radio, the show where we explore what it takes to be a leader of the leaders in corporate America. Get ready to be inspired and discover proven tips for going from average to exceptional. Now, here's your host and guide, Tony Sherman.
Hello and welcome to Impact Teams Radio. I'm your host and guide, Tony Sherman. This is a show for leaders who want to lead leaders. And today we have a return guest in Steve Lishansky. Steve, thanks very much for coming back.
Tony, always a pleasure to come back to you.
Thank you very much, Steve. So if you haven't heard Steve's first episode with us, you need to go back and listen to it because this is definitely going to be a continuation on this. And Steve, I want to focus in on leadership, and you gave us a lot of insight last time about how to develop value, how to think value for our customers, internal customers, external customers. But I want to move that slightly and talk about how do we create high-performing teams by building strong relationships or outstanding relationships, however you'd like to put that. So how do we do that? How do we do that?
Well, let's talk about the confluence between dealing with clients and dealing with building teams. In both cases, you're talking about how do you build the kind of trust, respect, and communication and that ultimately leads to a quality of relationship where you can begin to leverage your capabilities together. When you want to talk about a high-performing team, I call it how do we multiply the assets on our team versus doing simple addition or even worse, subtraction, or worst of all, division. And we've all seen teams like that where they're so divided, they're so dysfunctional that it's horrible. Let's go to the other side of that. How do I take you as one of my team members and my other team members and figure out what are the greatest talents where you could be a leverager of your capabilities, talents, and wherewithal? And how do we begin to create multiplication? One way to do that, and the most critical way for every good leader, is to make sure that we've got an alignment of our executive team towards our vision, our mission, and our goals. And I can't tell you how many times I've worked with a team, let me just say it really simply, 100%, that I've worked with executive teams, and what you end up with is you have people who have their own version of where we're going. They have their own version of the mission. They have their own take on what the top goals of the corporation are, and they're off running their own silo. We talk about silos as being the epitome of what's wrong with a lot of our best organizations. Everybody's running their own little shop, and we haven't got a coordination and a collaboration and communication about how to produce a multiplier that would accelerate our progress and produce better results. So the net effect of this is how do we bring everybody together so we can articulate, we can communicate, and we can coordinate with great commitment towards our vision, our mission, and our goals. That's ultimately what it is. And what I would say those are really about, the goals are about what are our measurements of accomplishment? What are the most important measurements of accomplishment? And our mission is about why those are the best choices. Our mission articulates why we're doing what we're doing. And it should provide the basis for good decision-making for our teams. So we got to understand always what's most important and why are these the best choices about what's most important. When we can communicate that, we have a high-performing team, at least the possibility of it. Now we start to talk about how to execute. But I got to tell you, so many teams are into execution before they know what they're trying to accomplish, and certainly before they know why these are the important accomplishments. Therefore, we have a ton of activity without a whole lot of value or impact.
But if you take that down on a more tactical level, at the executive level, I can see the value of that. If I'm implementing a project for a client, it's like the company sold a bunch of services. I have to implement a sophisticated software solution or a sophisticated product, and I'm just implementing the product. Do you think that still holds true for my team?
Yeah, absolutely. It holds true because we need to be clear about how our team's going to work together to deliver the real value. And the ultimate driver should always be the outcomes, not the processes. Whether you're a team of 1 or you're a team of 1,000, the question is, what are the most important results you're there to produce? Only then are we in a position, and is it appropriate to start to ask the question, how can we do that best? Now, here's what also, reason why that doesn't happen in that order often enough is because of this. When people are confused or unclear, they tend to devolve into action, something tangible. When I don't know what I really should be aiming at, my general response as a human being is, let me do something I'll feel better about it, and maybe I'll find out something. We call that trial and error. We throwing it against the wall and see if something sticks. It's not the most effective nor efficient way to do things. And what often we say to people, leaders of even small teams as well as obviously large organizations, stop and make sure everybody's clear about what's most important and about why we're making these choices. That allows you, whether you've got a team of 3 people or 3,000 people, to make sure that your people know the basis for their decisions, that they're not blindly following you and doing what you say. You want people to bring as much responsibility and resourcefulness to their job as possible. And if they're relying on you to tell them what to do, then you're not going to get a lot of initiative. If they understand this is what's most important and this is why we're doing it, they're going to bring a tremendous amount of their own resources and initiative to bear. So this is how you build higher performing teams as a leader. Make sure people understand the basis for decision making.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense because effectively it's like a laser at that point. Everybody's resonating on the same frequency, and therefore you get a lot more energy. That makes sense.
And also, what happens though, Tony, if they don't resonate on the same channel, they're off on their own channels. And you get the same thing you would have if you turn on your television or your radio, static and interference. And that's what most organizations look like, static and interference. And when you tune them, and they're aligned and they're all in the same channel, what can happen is incredible clarity with tremendous impact and acceleration.
Yes, and I was thinking about the acceleration because a lot of time organizations don't want to take the pause because they're worried about the productivity hit. But that's a false worry, in my opinion.
Very much a false worry, because if I look at most organizations I've walked into, and I did this once, one of my first big organizations, the CEO of the division was there. He had his 20 top people with him. And I asked the question, what percentage of your capability do you get to demonstrate at work every day? And you know what the average was for that group? And this was a very high-performing group. This was an outstanding group of individuals, far, far from what you would ever call a problem group. But you know what their total was in terms of what percentage of their capabilities they could bring to work every day? It was 50%. And I'm thinking their boss is in the room watching this. Do I think this might be high or low? I would think low. So you're talking about a high-performing group says they're only delivering 50% of their capability. Let's assume maybe 40 is appropriate. We could get a 50% increase, and we're only at 60 to 75% of their capability. Now, that's the least I would hope we're getting from any group is 75% of their real talents and capabilities. But if you look around at organizations today, that's not what's happening. And it's not happening because everybody's scurrying around looking busy instead of focusing and really aiming at creating impact. You know, we're out there delivering on small things. We're not thinking about what's most important, and are we delivering where there's the greatest opportunity for impact and value.
Absolutely. And part of that is if I'm in the professional services area, which is where I focus, we're billed on time and materials. So it's by billable hour, not by, so you're billing, I can't think of the right phrase, but you're not billing on value. You're billing on time and materials. And therefore, to some extent, that wastage isn't necessarily obvious and caught by leadership.
No. And I was talking to somebody. I work with a lot of very large clients. One of my dear friends works in an extraordinary environment. It's actually a public legal firm. They work for one of the counties in the United States here. And that county has such a high-performing culture. There's 70 attorneys plus the support staff, so it's not huge. But to get in there is difficult. To stay there is challenging. But people love each other, support each other, care about each other, deliver extraordinary value for their team and for the county they work for, and literally love working there. How many places can you say that for today? I have a lot of clients who struggle. I always call corporations today, they pay for pain. And I'll tell you what, the most exciting companies that we know of, the Apples, the Googles, they're not necessarily immune from this pay for pain, but they've got a culture of caring, of value, of making a difference, of producing an impact. And some of the smaller companies that explode upon our awareness here are doing it because they've got a clarity of mission that they're working together on. And that power of mission and that power of clarity about goals cannot be underestimated. It is, to me, the singular greatest impact, clarity of mission, clarity of goals, after quality of leadership in terms of the success of an organization.
Okay, so I would agree with that. I don't think anyone would disagree. But when it comes to execution, Steve, once we've got alignment, what's the next step in terms of creating great relationships? Like the picture you painted of that law firm, once you've got alignment and people are all producing a lot closer to their capacity, then you've got mutual respect, you've got a relationship building up. How do we do that? How do we take that next step after alignment?
This is where leaders are critical for creating that kind of clarity of focus. Let me share with you one of my actual clients, because I can tell you more about them than about this small firm, although this is a dear friend of mine I've been following for years that he worked there. And he just retired. So we had a retirement party. 180 people show up in an office. It's not even that big, but everybody who dealt with him had that. Here's what we did with one of our clients. The leader of this division, we looked at what they had, what they needed to do, and we looked at their people. And we came up with 4 standards. I call them principles, but literally they're standards. These are our fundamental foundation standards for how we operate. Call it a code of conduct. Call it standards, call it operating procedures, call it principles, whatever you want. But we said this: we will be known by these standards. Number 1, impeccable quality. Number 2, outstanding teamwork. Number 3, honesty and transparency. Number 4, respect and appreciation. Now, when we set these, we were not a perfect example of these. We really believed in them, but we had some gap between, really clear execution on these and really where we were. But what happens by stating clearly, by the leaders holding himself first to these standards, and then by communicating and clearly encouraging and supporting everybody to meet these standards, the elevation of the performance and the respect and standing of this organization within their bigger organization has been immense. So leaders need to set clear standards and principles of operation that their people can really understand and operate under, but also get supported to really meet. And I'll tell you what, it's a continuing process because these are not ever done. These are principles that, are based on human potential, and there's no limit to human potential, but we need to set a clear container. These 4 principles have elevated not just the performance of this group, but the standing and respect of this group within the enterprise. And that's what great leaders do, is set those kind of clear focus points.
If you've got the clear vision, the alignment that we were discussing, and
right,
you've got the standards, then realistically, the rest of it is done by the team then, isn't it? I mean, the leader holds the vision, holds the standards.
Right.
Do you see him holding anything else, or are those the 2 main things?
Those are the 2 main things. I'll tell you what, the leader has to take responsibility for everything. There's a great saying, leaders should take all the responsibility and give away all the praise. But what happens is the leader must be responsible, not that he or she has to do it herself or himself, but they need to make sure the vision and the mission and the primary goals, the most important goals, are clear. They own the establishment of that. Again, they don't need to do it by themselves. Ideally, they do it with their team. But they're responsible to make sure these are clear. They're also responsible to make sure the standards for the team are clear. Once again, I believe in the team doing that collectively, but the leader owns that. Now, a great leader then empowers his or her team to take on how to get these done. You want to give away as much as possible. So the strategies, the implementation, the tactics should be owned by the team that has to implement. And if they do that well, the leader has empowered his or her people to really bring their best to work to figure out how to achieve the things that we all agree are most important. And that's how you start to get a leader who is cultivating a high-performing team, who's cultivating initiative and responsibility, who is creating the environment and the opportunities for his or her people to really grow and to demonstrate what they're capable of. That's a great setup for a leader. So once again, they got to make sure that the mission, the vision, the goals are in place. They've got to make sure their people are getting clear and executing on the strategies. They can't just say it's not my job anymore. They need to be there to support their team as needed. But the more they can give away, the higher up they can go, and the more they can give to their team, the more successful they're going to be.
You can, as you paint that picture, Steve, you can almost see the multiplying effect, because effectively at that point, the leader becomes the oil in the engine.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, we talk about, I love the car analogies. You know, I've seen teams that are like an 800 horsepower engine, but there's no transmission and no tires on the car. You know, it's all ideas. On the other hand, I've seen cars that have a transmission and the wheels are spinning, but they're not going anywhere. And that's a team that's all about activity and lacks focus on what would really make a difference. So the key is to put it all together. We need to have a clarity of where we're going, why it matters, and then how do we get it done in the best way. Activity is no substitute for results. I think John Wooden used to say that, the great UCLA basketball coach. He said, never confuse activity with results. And I think that's really critical. The other thing, though, to really recognize, one of my iconic thinkers is Peter Drucker. And Peter Drucker said something that's so important. He said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So, you know, we can have the best strategy in the world, but if we don't have a culture of collaboration, communication, of honesty and transparency, of being able to work together as a team, it doesn't make any difference how good your strategy is. I will guarantee it will be nowhere near as well created or produced as one would hope. On the other hand, you find a team that really loves each other, that respects each other, that enjoys working together, and I will guarantee you, give them a strategy or let them develop their strategy, and you'll see amazing results.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I think there's a third component to this. If we say that the leader owns the alignment, and then that the leader owns the standards and making sure he enables his people in the execution of standards. I think the third thing is then to make sure that you have the right mix of people, because I mean there has to be times where when you're realigning a team that you have to prune the team and reinvigorate the team with new people.
Absolutely. Well, if you go back to one of my favorite business writers, Jim Collins, in Good to Great, one of his iconic books, he talks about who's on the bus. It's one of the jobs of leadership, figure out who's on the bus. And if you don't have the right people on the bus, you're going to have problems, because you have people who are not at the same level of commitment, who are not at the same level of capability for their specialty or responsibility. You're going to have a dysfunctional group, and that is going to disturb and diminish everybody's capability. And then the net effect of that team gets diminished massively. And it's a shame, because you really got to take out people who don't function well on the team. Sometimes there's a role for an individual contributor who really is not well suited to be on a team. And that's all well and good. But if they require teamwork, and more today it's about teamwork, and you have somebody who can't function with that team, you really have to, in the most compassionate and appropriate way, get somebody who is. And it's critical. Who's on the bus matters. The quality of your team will determine the quality of your results. And
to some extent, it's predicated on those standards that you set, because I mean, you can identify who won't cope with this particular mission and set of standards by if they're meeting the standards.
Absolutely. Well, here's the value of having clear principles and operating standards, as well as a clear mission and vision. When you're hiring, you can discuss these and see how people respond to them. Because when you're hiring, people are being hired into supporting this vision and mission and goals. They're being hired into these standards and principles and practices. And if they don't embrace these from the start, you got a problem. Because very few teams have this kind of clarity when they start. But when you do and you're hiring new people, it's so easy to validate this is something that they respond to, they resonate with, or it's something they go, well, that's nice. That's somebody who's going to go, that's nice, is not somebody you want on your team. Somebody goes, that's fantastic. I love that kind of clarity. Okay, this is a person who, if they have the technical skills that we need too, could be a very appropriate team member.
Right, and you can always teach technical skills. You can't teach hard.
Absolutely. Oh, so, hire characteristics and teach skills. That's a very good way to go.
And also, I was thinking, if I was listening to this, the one thing I would say is, well, I don't hire people. I'm stuck with the people that I've got. How do I get them in alignment? And I was thinking to what you said on the previous episode, at that point, if you need your team to change to play an A game rather than a B game, that's where leaders need to step back and think what the value equation that you were discussing last time. You know, we need to build a large enough value equation so that people will want to change, to see the value of change of upping their game.
Absolutely. That's so important because, again, I think sometimes we do it, people are inherited. You become a leader of a team that already exists there. It's not like you can just throw them out. In fact, that's a terrible thing to do from the start. You want to work with people because sometimes they didn't have the clarity of focus. They didn't have the quality of caring. They didn't have the level of communication that they really needed to bring their best to the game. You want to get to know what drives your people. You want to make sure that what drives them is appropriate for your team. You want to make sure that they've got the skills and that they're willing to learn and collaborate. Most people, given the chance to be on a great team, it's a huge opportunity. I remember, let me tell you, one of my clients used to run an operation, this is a bunch of years ago, when they had over 400 people whose job was to open envelopes and enter the check that they received into one of those green flashing screens on a computer. They booked $2 billion of payments a year. Now, can you imagine anything more boring or ridiculous than that? And the problem was is you had to do it. I mean, it had to get done. Those are the days when people sent checks and you had to enter it into the computer. So what they determined was, let's build the best team in the industry. And I'll tell you what, they went from being a fair performing organization to winning insurance companies something called the Dalbar Award 3 years in a row as the operations. Their retention went way up. The enthusiasm and morale of their team went way up. And what was the difference? They did the same job, but now they were part of a championship team. And that made enough of a difference to get a higher quality of people, to get those people to stay and perform better. That's the power of having a clear mission. Their mission and their most important goal, let's create the best team in the industry. Something that simple can be profound.
Yeah, I can see that because, but again, that goes to the quality of the leadership and building those, that clarity of alignment, those operating standards, and then building those relationships that feed that.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It does work together. So I've just looked up, Steve, for the first time since we started this interview, and we're out of time and space. So thank you so much for your energy and enthusiasm today.
It's a pleasure, Tony. Always a pleasure, and I wish the best to your audience.
Thank you. So, guys, we've again had a great time, a masterclass. I think if you, as a team leader, as a leader of leaders, were to take some of these ideas and say, creatively, how do I do this? How do I generate this clarity? How do I identify this value for my team, for my customers that we got from Steve last week and this week? I think you would, if you took that training, put it in your life, did it for the next 6 months, you'll be a far, far better leader and probably a better person to be around than you were in 6 months' time than you are today. So with that, I'll leave you and bid you all a good week until next Friday. This is Tony Sherman from Impact Teams Radio.
That's it for this week. Thank you for listening. Now go and apply these few gems. Make the wisdom you have heard your own. If you want to be part of our launch success, then please go to impactteamsradio.com/love and tell the world. If you want more and never want to miss a beat, please go to impactteamsradio.com/subscribe. If you have 3 minutes, we would love to see a positive review on iTunes. And until next time, remember to act on what you've learned, and you'll be ahead of most of the world. Impact Teams Radio.